Before we start, kindly subscribe to my channel and tell me, where in the universe are you watching from? Lucas Vance stared at the strange, glowing obelisk. His deep blue eyes squinted against the bright light, and the flickering of the energy made his skin tingle. The crash had left him stranded on this moon, light years away from Earth, alone. His space shuttle had malfunctioned, and he had no idea where he was or how he was going to survive. The obelisk seemed to pulse with power, an ancient, mysterious object hidden in the middle of the barren land. Then something happened that Lucas couldn't explain. The obelisk began to crack open, glowing brighter. He took a step back, heart racing in his chest, unsure whether to run or stay. Suddenly, a powerful force burst from the obelisk. Lucas fell to his knees as the energy swirled around him, and before he could react, a figure appeared before him. She stood tall, exuding an aura of power. The woman, her features striking and graceful, looked at him with bright, knowing eyes. She was beautiful in a way that made Lucas's breath catch, though there was something more to her that unsettled him. She seemed otherworldly, not quite human, but not something he could easily describe. "My name is Solara," she said, her voice smooth like honey. "I am a wish-granter, bound by an ancient pact. You have 3 wishes. Choose wisely." Lucas blinked, still not sure if he was dreaming or if he had somehow slipped into some bizarre, parallel world. He rubbed his eyes, trying to clear the haze. A wish-granter? Was this some kind of joke? He couldn't think straight, but her presence had a strange pull on him. 3 wishes. Lucas muttered, still in disbelief. He scanned the alien landscape, thinking of how to use his wish. Wealth? Power? No, those things wouldn't matter here. Then it struck him. "I wish you were free," Lucas said, his voice steady despite the racing thoughts in his mind. Solara's eyes widened in surprise. For a moment, there was silence, and Lucas felt an odd tension between them. He had expected her to smile or thank him, but she stood still, her gaze locked on him. "Free," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "No one has ever wished for that." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean? You said I could have 3 wishes. I want to help you." Solara looked away for a moment, lost in thought. Lucas could see the way her expression changed, as if something deep inside her had shifted. There was more to her story than she had let on. "You don't understand," she said softly, her voice filled with a quiet sadness. "I am bound. Even a wish like yours cannot easily break these chains." Lucas furrowed his brow. "Then how can I help you? How can we fix this?" She looked back at him, her gaze soft but still fierce. "You have given me the first part of my freedom. It will take more than just a wish to break all of my chains. We must find the pieces of the curse hidden across this world. Only then can I be fully free." Lucas nodded, determined to help. He didn't know what he had gotten himself into, but one thing was clear. He couldn't leave her here, trapped in this unknown place. Her eyes had touched something deep within him. As the two set off together, Lucas couldn't help but notice how easy it was to talk to her. There was an ease in their conversation that he hadn't expected. She was more than just a stranger with strange powers. She was intelligent, funny, and had a fire within her that made him feel both nervous and excited. Though she seemed to hold a lot back, Lucas noticed the way she looked at him when he made decisions, the respect in her eyes when he acted bravely. And when their paths brought them close, he could feel an undeniable pull, a connection that was more than just the journey they shared. The moon around them was desolate, yet Lucas felt something he hadn't expected: hope. Maybe this strange adventure was the beginning of something he hadn't anticipated, something deeper. The journey through the barren moon was harder than Lucas had expected. The ground was rocky, uneven, and the air thin. Each step seemed more exhausting than the last, but he never complained. Solara, who had been walking beside him in silence for the past few hours, seemed to glide effortlessly across the rough terrain. Her movements were fluid, graceful, almost as if she wasn't fully touching the ground. Lucas couldn't help but admire her strength and calm. "So, how long have you been stuck here?" Lucas asked, trying to break the silence. Solara glanced at him, her eyes softening for a brief moment. "Longer than you could imagine. It's been centuries, maybe more. Time doesn't feel the same when you're trapped in a place like this." Lucas nodded, processing her words. He had no idea what it felt like to be bound like she was. But he did know what it was like to be trapped, even if it was just a crash landing on a strange world. "How did it happen?" Lucas asked gently. "How did you end up like this?" Solara hesitated, her gaze falling to the ground. For a moment, Lucas thought she wouldn't answer, but then she spoke, her voice soft and distant. "I was once a guardian, an important figure on my home planet. I protected the knowledge of my people, their greatest secrets. But I was betrayed by those I trusted. They used my own powers against me, binding me to this curse. I became a tool, a means to grant wishes, but never allowed to use my own power for freedom." Lucas listened quietly, his heart heavy for her. He couldn't imagine the pain of being used like that for so long. But there was something in her eyes when she spoke about it, an unspoken determination. She might have been trapped, but she was far from broken. "I'm sorry you had to go through all of that," Lucas said, his voice sincere. Solara glanced at him, her lips curving into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Thank you. Most don't understand. But you seem to. It's strange." Lucas gave her a small smile back. "I guess that's what happens when you end up in strange situations together. You start to understand each other." Their conversation was interrupted by a loud, distant rumble. Lucas paused, his heart racing. He turned to Solara. "What was that?" Solara's eyes narrowed as she scanned the horizon. "Trouble. We're not alone here." Before Lucas could react, a huge shadow swooped down from above, blocking out the weak light of the distant stars. A massive creature, with sharp claws and glowing red eyes, landed with a deafening thud in front of them. It was a beast like nothing Lucas had ever seen. Its body was covered in jagged metallic armor, and its wings spread wide, blocking the path ahead. "Stay behind me," Solara ordered, her voice calm but firm. Lucas didn't hesitate. He stepped back, instinctively trusting her. The creature snarled, its eyes locking onto them as it took a step forward. Solara moved with speed that took Lucas by surprise, her body shifting into a ready stance. She raised her hand, and a stream of blue light shot out from her fingers, slamming into the creature's chest. The beast roared in pain, but it didn't retreat. It lunged forward with a vicious swipe of its claws. Without thinking, Lucas grabbed a large rock from the ground and hurled it at the creature, distracting it long enough for Solara to move in close. She kicked the creature with incredible force, sending it stumbling backward. The creature growled in anger, but Solara was already ready to strike again. Lucas stood there, watching her fight with awe. It was incredible to see her in action. She was powerful, graceful, and controlled. He could see the strength in every move she made, and he couldn't help but feel a growing admiration for her. As the creature charged at them again, Solara stepped forward and unleashed a powerful blast of energy, disintegrating the creature in an explosion of light. The air shimmered with the aftershock, and Lucas blinked against the brightness. When the dust settled, Solara stood tall, her chest rising and falling with steady breaths. She glanced at Lucas, her expression unreadable. "Are you okay?" Lucas nodded, still catching his breath. "Yeah, I'm good. But you, that was amazing." Solara's lips twitched upward into a small smile. "It's nothing. I've had a lot of practice." Lucas met her gaze, his heart racing. Despite the dangerous situation, despite the crazy journey they were on, he felt something stir within him. He couldn't explain it, but every moment spent with her, every challenge they faced together, seemed to bring them closer. Solara turned away, but Lucas caught a glimpse of her smile, one that seemed to be for him and him alone. Maybe he wasn't so alone after all. As the days passed, Lucas and Solara grew closer. The once barren moon now felt more like home to him, not because of the desolate landscape, but because of the company he kept. They spent long hours traveling through the rugged terrain, talking and sharing stories when the silence grew too heavy. Lucas found himself opening up to her in ways he hadn't with anyone in a long time. Solara, for her part, was different than he expected. Beneath the powerful, nearly godlike persona, there was a softness to her. He'd seen it in the way her voice would soften when she spoke about her past, and how her eyes seemed to linger on him just a little too long when they rested for the night. At first, he thought he was imagining it, but now he wasn't so sure. One evening, as the two sat around a small campfire, Lucas couldn't help but notice how the flickering light of the flames seemed to make Solara's features glow with an ethereal beauty. She looked deep in thought, staring into the fire, her expression distant. "Solara," Lucas called softly, drawing her attention. "I've been meaning to ask you something." She turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "What is it?" she asked, her voice calm, but with a hint of curiosity. "What was it like, before all of this? Before you became trapped?" Lucas asked, a gentle tone to his voice. He had always been curious about her past, but he never wanted to push too hard. She paused, her gaze lowering to the ground. "It was different. I was important. I had a purpose." She let out a sigh. "But that was a long time ago. Now, all I have is this curse." Lucas sat up straighter, a frown crossing his face. "I don't know how you've been able to keep going all this time," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "You're stronger than you think, Solara." Solara smiled, though it was bittersweet. "Strength doesn't always feel like strength when you're trapped in a cycle you can't break. But you're right. I've had to adapt." "And you?" She paused, her eyes meeting his, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to fade. "You're different, Lucas. I didn't expect someone like you to show up. Someone willing to help, even when they have no reason to." Lucas felt a warmth spread through him at her words. He had always considered himself just an ordinary guy, someone who did what was right, even when it wasn't easy. But hearing her say it made him feel something more, something deeper. He realized that despite everything, he didn't want this journey to end. They sat in silence for a few moments, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the distant winds of the moon's harsh landscape. The tension between them was palpable, but neither of them moved. Lucas's heart raced as he thought about his next words. He knew he was falling for her, but would she feel the same? Finally, Solara spoke, her voice almost a whisper. "Lucas, what happens after I'm free? What will you do?" Lucas didn't need to think long. He knew the answer in his heart, even if he didn't fully understand it yet. "I don't know. I'm not thinking that far ahead," he admitted, looking directly into her eyes. "But I do know that I don't want to lose you." The words were out before he could stop them. His heart skipped a beat as he waited for her response. Solara looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, a small smile tugged at the corner of her lips, and her eyes softened. "You're not like the others," she said quietly. "You don't want anything from me except to help. I've never met anyone like you before." Lucas's breath caught in his chest. He wanted to say more, but for a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them felt charged, as if the world was holding its breath. Finally, Solara broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe there's something for us after all. Maybe there's more than just freedom waiting for me." Lucas's heart skipped again, and he reached out, his hand brushing against hers. It was a small touch, but it felt like everything in that moment. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let her fingers linger for just a second longer. I think there is," Lucas said softly, his voice full of hope. For the first time since they met, Solara's smile reached her eyes, and Lucas knew in that moment that this journey, this adventure, wasn't just about freeing her. It was about something much bigger, something they both were starting to realize. The days grew warmer as Lucas and Solara ventured deeper into the moon's wilderness, moving from jagged cliffs to dense, alien forests filled with strange, whispering trees. The landscape was a constant reminder of how far they were from civilization. This world was empty, except for the remnants of forgotten beings and the shadows of long-lost times. But despite the loneliness of their journey, Lucas felt a strange sense of companionship whenever he looked at Solara. She had become more than just someone he was helping. The bond between them was growing stronger, and though neither of them had spoken of it aloud, it was impossible to ignore. Every look, every shared smile, felt more significant than the last. They stopped for a brief rest at the edge of a small clearing. The sky above was growing darker, the stars shining brighter against the deep purple sky. Lucas took off his jacket and sat down on a flat stone, staring out into the distance. Solara stood a few feet away, her arms crossed as she studied the map they had found in the ruins they'd explored earlier. The map was their only clue to where the next piece of her curse was hidden. The puzzle of this world seemed endless, but Lucas didn't mind. Being with Solara made every step feel worth it. "Do you ever think about what comes after?" Lucas asked, his voice breaking the silence. Solara looked up, her gaze catching his. After all of this is over, once you're free," he said, his voice quiet but full of meaning. Solara paused, considering his words carefully. "I thought about it, but freedom doesn't mean everything will be perfect. There's always something more to fight for." Lucas nodded, understanding what she meant. They had both been fighting for so long. Lucas to survive, and Solara to break her chains. It was easy to lose sight of the future when the present felt so consuming. "I get that," Lucas said. "But what if there's something more for us after all of this? Something good?" Solara turned her full attention to him now, her expression unreadable, but there was a soft curiosity in her eyes. "Are you saying you'd want to stay, even after I'm free?" Lucas's heart raced, and he swallowed hard. The weight of the question hung between them, but he didn't shy away from it. "Yes, I'm not saying I have it all figured out, but I don't want this to end. Not yet." For a moment, Solara didn't speak. Her gaze lingered on him, and Lucas felt his pulse quicken under her scrutiny. He knew that, just like him, she was probably wondering what this connection meant, what it could mean for them. "You're different from the others," Solara said finally, her voice almost a whisper. "You don't expect anything from me. You just care." Lucas smiled, feeling the sincerity of her words warm him. "I'm just here because I want to help you. And I don't want to see you alone again. Not like this." Solara took a small step forward, her eyes softening. "You've made me believe that there's still something worth fighting for. Maybe I'm not as alone as I thought." The air between them grew thick with unspoken words, the world around them seeming to fall away. Lucas's heart beat loudly in his chest, and he could feel the pull of her presence drawing him in. Without thinking, he stood and closed the distance between them, his hand reaching for hers. Her hand was warm when he touched it, and for a second, the silence stretched between them, both unsure but both feeling something undeniable. The connection was there, clear as day. He could feel it in the way she didn't pull away, in the way her gaze softened just a little more. I don't know what happens after this," Lucas said quietly, "but I do know that I want to find out with you." Solara didn't respond right away, but her smile said more than words ever could. Slowly, she placed her other hand over his, holding it with a tenderness that surprised him. "Then we'll find out together," she said, her voice full of warmth. "Maybe there's more for us. Maybe we're not as lost as we thought." Lucas felt a weight lift off his shoulders, as if he had been carrying an unseen burden for too long. It wasn't just about helping her anymore. It was about them, about finding something real in the chaos of their strange adventure. And for the first time since his crash, Lucas felt hope, not just for survival, but for something deeper, something he wasn't ready to let go of. As they stood there, hand in hand, the stars above seemed to shine just a little brighter. The journey wasn't over, but it felt like the beginning of something entirely new. And no matter what lay ahead, Lucas knew he wasn't alone anymore. The next few days were full of challenges. Lucas and Solara continued their journey across the moon's desolate landscape, pushing forward toward their goal. The map they had discovered led them to ancient ruins, hidden deep within an underground cavern. The path was treacherous, and they encountered strange creatures along the way. But each obstacle only seemed to bring them closer together. Lucas had never been one to believe in fate, but he couldn't ignore how everything had unfolded. The way he'd found Solara, the bond they shared, and the way she looked at him when they spoke, it all felt too perfect, too right. One evening, after a long day of navigating through the winding tunnels beneath the moon's surface, they set up camp inside a small, quiet alcove. The air was cool, and the distant hum of energy fields echoed through the rocks. Lucas sat down against the wall, feeling the weight of their journey pressing down on him. He couldn't help but look over at Solara, who was sitting on a large stone, her eyes scanning the map once more. "What's next?" he asked, breaking the silence. Solara looked up, meeting his gaze. "There's a temple nearby," she said, her voice steady. "That's where we'll find the last piece of my curse. It's hidden there, and only by unlocking the temple's secrets will I finally be free." Lucas nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. They were so close now. He could feel it. But there was something else, something deeper, that tugged at his heart. He had grown to care for Solara in a way that was more than just helping her break her curse. He didn't know what to call it yet, but every moment spent with her made him realize just how much he wanted to be by her side, no matter what. As if sensing his thoughts, Solara looked at him again, her expression unreadable. "Lucas," she said softly, "I know you've been thinking a lot about what happens after all of this is over." He blinked, surprised by her words. "You've noticed." She smiled, but it was a quiet, almost wistful smile. "I have. You've been different lately. And so have I." Lucas swallowed, unsure of how to respond. He didn't want to sound foolish or overconfident, but he knew he had to speak his mind. "I don't know what happens after we free you, Solara, but I want to be with you. I don't want this connection between us to end. Not now. Not ever." For a moment, Solara was silent, her eyes focused on the map in her hands. Lucas could feel his heart pounding, waiting for her response. He wasn't sure why he was so nervous, but with her, everything seemed to matter more. Finally, she looked up at him, her gaze soft and thoughtful. "I don't know what the future holds either," she said quietly. "But I've never felt like this before. I've been alone for so long, trapped in my curse. But you've made me believe that maybe there's something more, something I didn't even know I was looking for." Lucas's heart soared at her words. He felt a rush of warmth spread through him, and before he could stop himself, he stood and walked toward her. Slowly, gently, he reached for her hand, his fingers brushing against hers. The simple touch sent a shock of electricity through him. Solara didn't pull away. Instead, she let her hand rest in his, her fingers curling around his with a tenderness that spoke volumes. They stood there for a moment, the world around them silent, as if holding its breath. "I don't want to lose you either," Lucas said, his voice full of emotion. "Whatever happens, I want to stay by your side. I'll fight for you. For us." Solara's lips parted slightly, and for the first time, she allowed her emotions to show fully. She stepped closer to him, closing the space between them. Her voice was barely a whisper as she spoke. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," she admitted. "But I do, Lucas. I do." And just like that, the unspoken connection between them shifted, deepening into something neither of them had expected. They weren't just two people caught in an impossible situation anymore. They were something more. And for the first time, the future didn't seem so uncertain. Lucas gently cupped her face in his hands, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. "We'll face whatever comes together. You and me." Solara's eyes softened, and she nodded, her lips curling into a smile. Together. The words hung in the air, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. The campfire flickered softly in the distance, the only sound between them the beating of their hearts. The weight of the journey ahead was still there, but now it didn't seem as heavy. With Solara by his side, Lucas knew they could face anything. They were stronger together, and nothing else mattered. The night passed quickly, and soon Lucas and Solara were back on the move. The temple was close now. They had been following the map through dark caverns and twisted paths for days, but the end was in sight. Lucas could feel the weight of the journey lifting, but there was also a strange sense of nervousness inside him. What would happen when they finally reached the temple? Would Solara be free, or would the curse continue to hold her? They traveled together in silence, the only sound the crunch of their boots against the rocky terrain. Solara kept her eyes focused ahead, her expression steady, but Lucas could sense that something was on her mind. She had been quieter than usual the past few days, and he knew it wasn't just the journey that was weighing on her. "Solara," Lucas said, breaking the silence. "You've been quieter than usual. Is everything okay?" She paused for a moment, then glanced over at him. "I've just been thinking about everything. What will happen after I'm free? What will we do? It's hard to imagine a life without this curse hanging over me." Lucas nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He had been thinking about the same thing. After all this time, after everything they had been through, what would their lives look like once they succeeded? What would it mean for them? "We'll figure it out," he said softly, meeting her gaze. "We don't have to have all the answers right now. What matters is that we're together. That's enough for me." Solara looked at him for a long moment, and he could see the conflict in her eyes. She had always been strong and independent, but now she was allowing herself to be vulnerable. It was something Lucas admired about her, and it made him want to protect her even more. "I don't want to let you go," she whispered, almost to herself. The words hit Lucas like a wave, and for a moment, he was speechless. He hadn't expected her to say something like that, but hearing it made his chest tighten with emotion. He stepped closer to her, his heart pounding. "I don't want to let you go either," he replied quietly, his voice full of sincerity. There was a brief silence between them before Solara finally spoke again, her voice softer this time. "I never thought I'd find someone like you. You've shown me so much kindness, Lucas. It's more than I've ever known in all the years I've been trapped." His heart swelled with warmth at her words. He had always known that helping her was the right thing to do, but now, hearing her say that, it meant so much more. He reached out and gently took her hand, their fingers intertwining. "We're in this together," he said, his voice steady. "Whatever happens, I'll be right here, by your side." They continued walking, hand in hand, the weight of the words between them hanging in the air. It wasn't just about freeing her anymore. It was about something deeper, something neither of them could ignore. They were no longer just companions on a journey. They were something more. Finally, they reached the temple. It stood tall in the distance, a massive structure carved into the side of the mountain. The air around it felt charged, as if it was alive with ancient power. The entrance was guarded by massive stone statues, their eyes seemingly watching their every move. Solara stopped, her hand still in Lucas's, and looked up at the temple. She could feel the power radiating from it, the energy that had kept her trapped for so long. "This is it," she said, her voice steady, but tinged with something else. Anticipation, perhaps, or fear. "This is where it all ends." Lucas gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "You're ready for this, Solara. You've been ready for a long time." She smiled at him, though it was small, and took a deep breath. "I hope so." Together, they stepped forward, approaching the massive stone doors of the temple. The path ahead was uncertain, but they were no longer alone in their journey. They had each other. And no matter what happened next, Lucas knew one thing for sure: he would never leave her side. The doors creaked open slowly as they entered, and the world around them seemed to shift. The challenges they had faced so far were nothing compared to what awaited them inside, but Lucas was ready. He was ready for whatever came next. With Solara by his side, he knew they could face anything. The massive stone doors creaked open slowly, revealing the dark, ancient halls of the temple. Lucas felt a chill run down his spine as he stepped inside, the air thick with mystery and age. The walls were covered in strange symbols, glowing faintly in the dim light, but there was no time to wonder about them now. They had a goal, and it was right in front of them. Solara stepped beside him, her hand still gripping his. She was calm, though Lucas could feel the tension in her fingers. This was the moment they had both been waiting for. They had come so far, faced so many dangers, and now they were at the heart of it all. The last piece of her curse was within reach. They moved deeper into the temple, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The hall was lined with tall columns that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the high ceiling. Strange statues of forgotten gods and creatures stood at attention along the walls, their eyes almost watching them as they passed. Every step felt like it brought them closer to something unknown, something powerful. The deeper they went, the more the air seemed to vibrate with an unspoken energy. Lucas couldn't help but feel the weight of the place pressing down on him, like the temple itself was alive. Solara noticed the change too, her gaze flicking to the walls as if she were listening to something only she could hear. "This place," Solara whispered, her voice tinged with awe. "It feels alive. The energy here is strange, almost like it's calling to me." Lucas squeezed her hand gently. "We're almost there. We'll finish this together." She nodded, though there was a hint of uncertainty in her eyes. She had been fighting this curse for so long, and now that they were so close, it almost felt unreal. What if it didn't work? What if the curse didn't break? She couldn't let herself think that way, not now. She had to believe that they could do this. Finally, they reached the center of the temple, a large open chamber with a massive stone altar at its heart. Strange lights flickered across the stone floor, casting eerie shadows on the walls. In the center of the altar was an intricate design, a symbol that matched one of the markings Solara had seen on the map. "This is it," she said, her voice full of determination. "This is where it ends." Lucas looked around, taking in the strange aura of the room. He could feel the tension building, the air thick with anticipation. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but he was ready to face it. He turned to Solara, his heart swelling with emotion. "I'm with you. No matter what happens, I'm here." Solara met his gaze, her eyes softening. She had never imagined she would find someone like him. Someone who cared so much, someone who made her feel human again. For the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could be free. With a deep breath, Solara stepped toward the altar, her steps confident but careful. She placed her hand on the symbol in the center of the altar. For a moment, nothing happened. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of energy. But then, a low rumble echoed through the chamber, and the symbol began to glow brighter. Solara felt a surge of energy pulse through her, a wave of warmth and light that enveloped her entire being. She closed her eyes, focusing on the energy as it seemed to flow through her, pulling at the very core of her being. Lucas watched, his heart pounding in his chest. He could see the change in Solara's expression, the way her eyes seemed to light up with the power she was releasing. He wanted to say something, to reach out to her, but he knew that now wasn't the time. She needed this moment to herself. The rumbling grew louder, and the ground beneath them began to shake. Lucas braced himself against the altar, but Solara stood firm, her hand still pressed against the glowing symbol. The light intensified, blinding for a moment, before it began to slowly fade. When the light finally dissipated, The room was still again. The shaking stopped. The energy that had filled the air was gone, leaving behind a peaceful silence. Solara opened her eyes, blinking against the fading glow. She felt different, lighter, freer. The curse was gone. She could feel it. The weight that had haunted her for so long was finally lifted. She turned to Lucas, a smile spreading across her face. "It's over," she whispered, her voice full of wonder. Lucas stepped toward her, his expression full of relief and joy. He reached out and took her hand, pulling her gently into an embrace. "We did it," he said softly. "You're free." For a long moment, they stood there, holding each other, letting the reality of their success sink in. The journey had been long and difficult, but they had made it through, together. And now, with the curse behind them, they could finally look forward to a future where they were no longer bound by the past, a future they would build together. With the curse finally broken, the air around them felt lighter. The weight that had once held Solara down was gone, replaced by a sense of freedom she had never known. She stood still for a moment, letting the peace settle over her. It was a feeling she had longed for, a feeling she could hardly believe was real. For the first time in centuries, she was free. Lucas watched her with a mixture of awe and relief. He had seen her go through so much, and now to see her standing before him, no longer bound by the curse, was like witnessing a miracle. He stepped closer, his heart full of warmth as he reached for her hand. "You did it, Solara," Lucas said softly, his voice full of admiration. "You're free." Solara looked up at him, her eyes shining with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you, Lucas. You've been with me every step of the way." He smiled, his thumb brushing gently across her hand. "I told you, I'd always be here. And now we can start something new, together." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. There was so much they hadn't said yet, so much they still needed to figure out. But right now, it didn't matter. They had time. They had each other. Solara took a deep breath, turning to face the temple's exit. "We should leave this place. It doesn't feel like home anymore." Lucas nodded, his gaze following her as she started walking toward the exit. Together, they made their way out of the temple, leaving the ancient halls behind. The outside world was still and peaceful, the bright stars above a reminder of the vastness of everything they had just overcome. They had made it out, and now they were free to shape their own future. As they walked through the moon's quiet landscape, Solara felt a sense of hope she hadn't felt in so long. The journey had been difficult, but it had led her to something far more important than freedom from the curse. It had led her to Lucas. The connection they shared was stronger than anything she could have imagined. She didn't know what the future would hold, but she knew one thing for sure. She wanted to experience it with him. Lucas glanced at her, his expression soft and open. "So what now?" he asked. "Where do we go from here?" Solara stopped walking for a moment, turning to face him. The question hung between them, full of possibilities. "I don't know," she admitted. "But for the first time, I feel like I can actually choose." "We can choose." Lucas smiled, taking her hand in his once more. "Then let's choose to explore it together. Whatever it is, whatever comes next, we'll face it side by side." She smiled back, a sense of warmth spreading through her chest. The path ahead might be uncertain, but with Lucas, she felt like she could face anything. The past might have shaped who they were, but it didn't have to define what they would become. The future was open to them, waiting to be written. They continued walking, side by side, toward whatever came next. With every step, their bond deepened, a silent promise between them. There were no more curses, no more chains. There was only the two of them, and the world before them, filled with endless possibilities. "Thank you, Lucas," Solara said quietly, squeezing his hand. "For everything." He looked at her, his heart full of affection. "You don't need to thank me. I'm just glad I could be a part of this. You deserve everything, Solara." The stars above twinkled brightly, as if acknowledging their words. And as they walked together, they both knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them as one. The bond they shared was stronger than anything they had ever imagined, and it was just the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. Together, always.